In the shadows of a dim world, a distant voice reverberated faintly. A slender hand grazed the surface of the table. The girl let out a soft sigh, lamenting that misfortune had arrived once more, pondering how she might avert the looming ill omen. She observed him battling a series of opponents, her mind tense with each clash, wondering if in any confrontation he might meet his end, whether by the venomous strike of a spider or by some hidden weapon he wielded. Though she trailed the man in the suit, she still could not decipher the path his fate would take. The yokai erupted in laughter, intoxicated by the knowledge that the hangway had gained yet another ally. The lioness had emerged from a field of dandelion blooms, a formidable ally indeed, yet perhaps vulnerable to a tiger's strike. Countless variables remained in play. Even without the lion, she retained other strategies she could deploy, though the fear lingered that all of them might eventually rally behind the man in the suit. Unable to see the human's future with clarity, her curiosity only deepened. And then, as her vision of him faded, she mourned the loss of the distant view she had cherished. In the end, it made no difference, for fortune and disaster always seemed to move side by side. Even if fate had marked him for misfortune, her refusal to turn away would transform every ill omen into blossoms along his journey. A terrified boy found himself cornered by a trial he could no longer run from. Beside him stood a girl, both facing a massive wolf whose presence resembled that of a final adversary. The beast's growl shook the air, its gaze fixed on them with predatory intent, and the boy couldn't help but feel the cruel imbalance of fate. The girl with silver hair exhaled, recognizing that escape was no longer possible, and advanced just as the creature gathered its strength to strike. Elsewhere, in a sterile hospital corridor, a cry of disbelief echoed. A man's frustration spilled out as he realized his sister's treatment was no longer eligible under the revised coverage policy. The clerk calmly pointed to the new regulations, where continued care was only possible through private means. He felt the weight of reality as she presented the staggering cost of the treatment without the safety net of insurance. The sight of the price left him stunned, his mind freezing at the endless digits that trailed after the number 5. In the hospital office, the physician outlined the grim reality. Without continued medication, his sister's lower body would soon lose all movement. When he entered her room, the weight of responsibility pressed on him, every step a reminder that her survival now hinged on his financial strength. His sister's expression carried quiet worry, already aware of the treatment costs. Wanting to protect her from anxiety, he masked his despair with a calm demeanor, pretending that new opportunities had eased their burden. She tried to respond with optimism, speaking of her dedication to school as though the future were still within reach. Though her words brought a fleeting warmth, his heart remained heavy, haunted by the thought that their parents' absence had left them defenseless against hardship. Later, at a prominent city bank, his request for a loan was turned away. The rejection shattered his composure, leaving him adrift in frustration and helplessness. He spent hours trapped in thought, searching for a solution that refused to appear. Overcome by despair, he crushed the papers in his hands and hurled his wallet against the wall. As it hit the ground, a stray kitten padded over, its soft mew piercing the silence, while his mind circled endlessly around a single thought: how to find the money that could save her. Confusion and frustration tangled in his mind as he considered every possibility, his hands tightening until his knuckles ached. He knew the bank had already branded him as unreliable, his credit record too poor to grant any help. The realization that no one would lend him money deepened his panic, and in that moment of despair, he pulled at his hair in silent agony. A sense of powerlessness spread through him, the image of Yi Jin confined to a bed haunting every thought. Forcing himself to move, he pushed off the ground, refusing to let hopelessness consume him completely. As he reached down to collect the scattered papers, the small cat lunged at his arm, its claws digging into his sleeve. The sting snapped him from his thoughts, and while trying to free himself, he noticed an unfamiliar card among the mess. It was simple, clean, and oddly out of place. Curiosity overtook frustration as his eyes traced the words printed on it, an offer promising high pay for immediate work. The phrasing struck him as strange, and suspicion crept in as he wondered what kind of employment could demand such secrecy and urgency. Deciding he still had a sliver of pride left, he pushed aside the thought of accepting the strange offer and carried on as if the discovery meant nothing. Yet, as a precaution, he slipped a business card into his wallet before leaving. Later that night, the glow of his apartment window cut through the darkness of the city skyline. Fresh from a shower, he felt the phone buzz persistently in his pocket, each vibration followed by a new notification. A string of automated withdrawals drained his balance one after another, and a cold realization settled in. His situation had already reached the point of no return. With no room left for hesitation, he accepted that his choices had narrowed to one. Despite every instinct warning him against it, he retrieved the card and entered the number. The call connected immediately, and a soft female voice began reciting what sounded like a scripted passage about virtue and righteousness. The words felt eerily out of place, their rhythm mechanical and hollow. He hesitated, uncertain whether he had stumbled upon a scam or something else entirely. The voice paused, and for a few seconds, only silence filled the line. A strange tension hung in the air as he checked the number once more, certain it matched the one printed on the card, yet unable to shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something far beyond his understanding. What followed defied his expectations. The voice on the other end sounded genuinely taken aback, as if receiving a call had been the least likely outcome. The conversation grew stranger by the second, when she began listing instructions with unnerving precision, naming Wannock Municipal Hospital as the site of an assignment and demanding his arrival within 30 minutes. Her tone carried no hesitation, only an implicit threat that failure to comply would end their connection entirely. Against all reason, he found himself agreeing, moving almost automatically as though the decision had been made for him. Half an hour later, dressed according to the oddly specific attire the caller had described, he stood before the hospital's entrance, the chill of the night air cutting through his uncertainty. Checking his phone, he realized he hadn't even asked what kind of work awaited him. Anxiety stirred as he mentally rehearsed possible excuses to flee if things turned out to be dangerous. His thoughts circled back to the debts piling up and the hopelessness of his situation, when footsteps interrupted his spiraling mind. A woman approached, addressing him with quiet familiarity, and he instinctively turned. For a moment, everything around him blurred. The sight of her, silver hair glinting under the streetlights, posture graceful yet commanding, left him momentarily speechless, the weight of her presence enough to strip words from his tongue. When she drew close, the atmosphere around him seemed to shift in an indescribable way. Something about her presence stirred an instant sense of trust, convincing him that whatever awaited wouldn't cross into anything unlawful. Even so, her appearance left him momentarily stunned, her beauty almost unreal. Yet beneath that admiration was an unshakable unease, a strange fear that felt like being dragged into dark waters. Once his thoughts cleared, he noticed how near she stood, and an awkward tension filled the space between them. Her eyes lingered on him with quiet suspicion, their intensity pressing down on him until he could feel the chill of nervous sweat forming. After a long moment, she turned away, apparently satisfied, and gestured for him to come along. As they walked, he gathered enough courage to ask about their destination and the nature of the job. The response left him uneasy. They were on their way to the hospital's funeral section. Nearby, a man and a young woman stood in dispute, their grief unmistakable. Despite appearances, they weren't lovers. The man explained that he had once been a close friend of her late father and had come only to express sympathy. The man's behavior turned vile as his hand reached for the young woman, his words dripping with unsettling familiarity as he reminisced about her childhood. The girl recoiled in anger, demanding distance. Watching the scene unfold, the silver-haired woman calmly instructed Li Du-jin to prepare himself. Confused by her tone and unsure of her meaning, he hesitated, but she offered no further explanation, only lifted a small cup to her lips and took a slow sip, her composure unbothered. The quiet gesture unsettled him more than he expected, and he averted his gaze, unsure why the moment carried such weight. Meanwhile, the older man continued his advances, claiming his behavior was justified by his long-standing friendship with the deceased. Disgust rising within him, Li Du-jin seized the man's wrists, stopping him from laying another hand on the girl. The interruption drew a sharp glare as the man revealed his irritation, asserting his importance and identifying himself as someone affiliated with the funeral services. Offended by the intervention, he lashed out, slapping away Li Du-jin's hand with exaggerated outrage, his voice rising in indignant fury. The silver-haired woman moved forward, taking command of the tense atmosphere. She dismissed the notion that they represented the funeral company, but confirmed that the older man before them was the individual they had been seeking. Her words left both onlookers stunned, uncertainty flickering in their eyes as they struggled to grasp what she meant. Maintaining an almost unnerving composure, she began to recount the man's history in detail. His full name, age, profession, and family background. Every fact delivered with precision. The color drained from Kim Hangshik's face as fear overtook his confusion, unable to comprehend how a stranger could possess such intimate knowledge of his life. The woman's tone never wavered as she revealed more, describing a series of killings that he had committed over the years, his most recent crime having taken place just the night before. The young woman nearby felt her world collapse under the weight of those words. Her father's death, long believed to be an accident from the previous evening, suddenly fit into a darker pattern. Reports had already begun circulating about the incident, linking it to other scandals involving Kim Hang-shik. The faint scent of burning incense and the framed photo of her late father cast a somber stillness over the room, heightening the grim reality that the man claiming friendship had in fact been the cause of his death. The older man let out a bitter, mocking laugh, clearly amused by the notion that someone had taken the trouble to investigate him. He boasted about the influential contacts stored in his phone and the power he could wield with a single call, confident in his immunity. Unfazed, the silver-haired woman met his gaze with unwavering intensity, declaring that the weight of his past misdeeds had finally caught up to him. She explained that in his 60 years, he had inflicted far more harm than he deserved, and that this was his final opportunity to acknowledge and atone for his actions. Dismissing her words with scorn, he refused to show remorse, considering her warnings trivial and the moral claims laughable. He summoned his secretary to arrange a golf game, completely disregarding the presence of anyone else in the room. Suddenly, a low vibration resonated through the space, and the balance of the world seemed to shift subtly. She announced that it was time for their task to begin, leaving Lee Do-jin momentarily stunned. Focusing on the older man, she indicated that he needed to be stopped. In an instant, Kim Hang-shik collapsed to the floor, leaving everyone present in utter shock at the sudden turn of events. Overwhelmed by panic, Lee Do-jin lunged toward the fallen man, desperate to rouse him. The silver-haired woman remained composed, revealing that the person on the ground was not their true target. The real threat lay ahead, a creature shifting between dimensions. Stunned and paralyzed, he struggled to comprehend the impossible vision before him, the reality of the situation pressing in from all sides. There was no rational explanation, and yet he had already plunged into this perilous moment with no path for retreat. Each step the wolf took caused the floor to groan ominously, a chilling reminder of its immense presence. Its approach grew increasingly oppressive, filling the space with a suffocating aura of danger. Lee Do-jin's body shook under the weight of his fear. With eyes that glowed fiercely and fur rippling with tension, the wolf lunged forward. It felt as though they were ensnared within an inescapable domain, the darkness spreading around them with every heartbeat. A deep, resonant growl echoed, signaling that nothing but its intended prey could exist in the space. Urgency surged through Lee Do-jin as he recognized the need to escape. In an instant, the girl at his side vanished without warning, leaving him alone to confront the mounting terror. She reassures him that there's no reason to fear, for they had in fact crossed into the barrier. It was they who vanished from the world, not the girl. With composed steps, she clarifies that this realm belonged to the monster. She explains that it was the place where creatures like the wolf dragged corrupted people, such as the old man, to hunt them. As expected, the wolf launches its attack at their position, but the white-haired goddess moves faster, ensuring everyone's safety. Harshly and without concern, she sets the two burdens onto the ground. Acting as if nothing had occurred, she turns to indicate that their task was to prevent the hunt. The wolf growls, realizing they were present merely as obstacles. It then readies its assault, no longer aiming at a single target, but three. Swiftly, the girl lifts her notebook, now marked with a magical symbol, intercepting the wolf's strike effortlessly. Like a helpless prince, he is rescued by the princess, left astonished by her might. The wolf regards her favorably, intrigued by the strength she wields. Still disoriented, the protagonist questions whether any of this is real or merely a dream. The creature lunges once more, but the goddess drags him away before it lands the blow. Part of the hospital wall shatters from the impact, and through the cloud of dust, the wolf glimpses two silhouettes standing firm. The creature grows irritated, realizing they had successfully evaded its attacks. Cradled in the arms of the woman, Lee Do-jin truly appeared like a defenseless prince. If a fight was to happen, the wolf resolved to accept the challenge. It scoffed at the sight, judging the human she carried as weak, surely incapable of harming even a fly. Yet, the monster seemed oblivious to a subtle detail, the goddess noted. Despite all the chaos and explosions, not a single hair on either of them had been touched. Still held in her arms, the young prince wondered what she was thinking, provoking the wolf so deliberately. She proposed a contest. The human would face the monster, and the first to sustain injury would retreat, with even a minor scratch determining the victor. The wolf grew eager at the suggestion, confident that a mere human could not harm it. It awaited Li Du-jin's readiness to engage. Frightened for his life, he tried to find ways to avoid the battle, but his current partner remained steadfast, assuring him there was no danger. She sets him back onto the ground, completely ignoring the fact that he is on the verge of wetting himself from sheer terror. She inquires whether he knows how to wield any weapon. How could he possibly know, given that until now he had only been a student? He wonders. The goddess insists that a diligent student should at least be able to handle a bow and arrow. In truth, he has no idea how to use one. They begin debating what weapon he might actually be capable of using, while the wolf waits idly like an NPC. She is incredulous that he genuinely lacks any skill with weapons, and the handsome boy grows embarrassed over being so utterly helpless. The goddess regards him as if he were the most pathetic man she has ever encountered. Humiliated, he attempts to defend himself. In a gesture akin to a soldier willing to sacrifice his life for his nation, he finally admits there is one weapon he can handle. Following her command, as if he were a trained dog, he kneels. She begins a nearly sacred ritual, invoking the creation of the weapon according to his imagination. To complete the process, she leans forward and places a kiss on his forehead. It seemed the protagonist had just fallen head over heels. She silently wished for his weapon to take shape exactly as he imagined, gazing intently into his eyes. Still dazed, trying to process the recent events, he merely nodded. Suddenly, he stiffened, snapping back to reality. There was no time to be flustered now. From its long wait, the wolf even drifted off briefly. Yet when it sensed the surge of magic, it realized the preparations were complete and began readying itself for combat. The creature noted that while the human might appear weak, his spirit was formidable, no longer showing fear of the impending fight. Unlike before, his focus was unwavering, fully immersed in envisioning the weapon he would wield. Without hesitation, the wolf lunged. Instinctively, Li Du-jin began manifesting his weapon. Having studied 3D modeling in college, visualizing and designing objects virtually was second nature to him. In fact, he had practiced it extensively before. Closing his eyes, he concentrated on the creation. Perhaps all those years of study were about to serve a real purpose. A blue glow enveloped the forming weapon, and he felt its weight settling into his hands. At the final moment, the weapon fully takes shape. Without hesitation, he aims it directly at the wolf and activates it, striking the monster's paw. Shell casings scatter across the ground as the shots ring out, their noise reverberating throughout the barrier. The creature is bewildered by the strange device. How could a human inflict damage like that? Retreating as far as it could, it attempts to evade the bullets. Everything unfolds exactly as the goddess had anticipated. The boy has finally reclaimed his dignity, no longer a powerless prince. Reflective, the wolf realizes it had overlooked the fact that humans were capable not only of sin, but also of retribution. Despite the initial shock, the monster finds the situation fascinating. Previously, they had managed to wound it, so it decides to withdraw for the moment. Before departing, it ensures to declare its identity as Bam Siori, one of the six fangs with a recognized name. In turn, Li Du-jin introduces himself. The creature repeats his name slowly, as if savoring every syllable. It intends to remember each and every letter of the boy's name. The barrier fades, and everything returns to its usual state. Li Du-jin exhales deeply, relieved that everything had ended well. He glances around, noticing that all the damage had somehow been restored. The goddess approaches, acknowledging the successful outcome. The danger had finally passed, allowing them both a moment to relax. A snap of fingers echoes, and the weapon in his hand vanishes as if by enchantment. His phone buzzes, signaling a new message. It appears a payment has been transferred into his account. She begins to provide further details about the mission, but he gestures that it's unnecessary. He had only participated as a freelancer and had no plans to continue engaging in such perilous work. Soon, he starts preparing to depart. She asks him to pause for a moment, wishing to share something. Upon seeing that the envelope contained the same sum already deposited into his account, he stiffens. With a gentle expression, she urges him to accept the envelope as well. Since it wasn't a mere bonus, and he truly needed the money, he accepts it. If he ever decided to work with her again, all he would have to do is open the envelope, and that would be enough. She could track him down anywhere, using a touch of her charm. She hoped he wouldn't wait too long, eager to see him once more. Meanwhile, a car accident occurs in the heart of the city. 3 passengers lie unconscious inside the burning vehicle. One of them murmurs the names of the 2 siblings, Eugene and Yi-jin. Still caught in the remnants of the previous dream, Du-jin calls out for his parents. His sister, however, had other intentions for him. He awakens abruptly, feeling the cold she had tossed onto him. She appears pleased to have roused him, reminding him that he had asked for it. That morning, they had a follow-up appointment at the hospital, so they needed to get ready. Jean informs him that breakfast is already prepared. The thought of hospital bills briefly overwhelms him with anxiety. Then he remembers the payment he had received from the job the night before. Quickly, he grabs his phone to check the exact amount. Oh my, what an outrageous sum it was. Exactly the amount he had needed. He could hardly believe it. The total came to precisely $5 million. He wasn't even paying attention to his breakfast. Stunned, all he could focus on was that incredible sum. Aimlessly pacing the living room like a dazed figure, he finally snapped back to reality after stubbing his pinky toe. Jean sighed, hearing her brother's yelp, realizing he was hopeless. The agony of stubbing a pinky was all too real. His gaze fell on the envelope lying on the table, and he remembered that it contained the same amount. Perhaps he should open it, just a quick peek, a tiny glance. At that moment, he recalled what the goddess had mentioned the previous night, including her promise to find him anywhere. Gazing at the envelope, he wondered if this was truly what she meant. The saying about curiosity killing the cat had never seemed so tangible. A voice seemed to echo through the room. Frozen, he heard it coming from behind him and slowly turned. There was a small lump tucked under the blanket. He lifts the blanket and comes face to face with the goddess lying there in his bed. Though he wouldn't normally react that way, he couldn't help himself. Terrified, he wonders how long she had been there. Suddenly, he hears his sister approaching, asking if everything is all right. Realizing she was about to enter, he scrambles to act quickly. Unfortunately, the tactic he chose was far from ideal. Jean glares at him, trying to make sense of her brother's ridiculous behavior. He protests about her knocking while he was caught in such a suspicious position. In response, she pretends to knock and insists on speaking with him. She mentions hearing a woman's voice from his room, and awkwardly he claims it was just a video on his phone. Spotting the perfect chance to tease him, she smirks, noting how lonely her brother was without a girlfriend despite his age. He was desperate enough to be caught in such a compromising situation in broad daylight. After leaving, she says she's heading to the convenience store, giving him some privacy. A massive misunderstanding had just unfolded. Feeling awkward as he stared at the goddess, still lying in his bed, Li Du-jin decided that this misunderstanding was far easier to deal with than trying to explain the truth. At a nearby cafe, the two sat across from each other while he struggled to process the fact that a woman had been in his bed for the first time. A news broadcast on the television caught his attention. It reported that Kim Hang-shik had died in a car accident. He was puzzled by the report, as that was the same old man they had rescued from the wolf just the day before. The goddess confirmed that it was indeed him. Ironically, the old man had perished in the very same manner as his previous victims. She remarked that, because he had been saved from the wolf, Kim Hang-shik's soul was properly delivered to hell, leaving Li Du-jin bewildered. But what exactly was she, really? As it turned out, the goddess originated from the underworld. Not fully convinced, he wondered if she might simply be a lunatic. However, reflecting on everything that had occurred, he realized he had assisted her in preventing the hunt for impure souls, ensuring they reached their proper destination. She noted that his understanding wasn't entirely incorrect, but missed two crucial points. Her role was to suppress the evil residing within each person and to stop the demons that sought to prey on them first. Guiding souls was not part of her responsibility. Instead, her focus was on protecting them so they could follow their destined path. In essence, their task was to safeguard human souls from demons like the wolf they had encountered. Those creatures were the only beings not born from the universe itself. They originated from the sins of humanity, everything that fell outside the creation of the cosmos. They emerged from the lowest depths of the human soul, existing beyond the boundary of life. Supreme predators among all evil entities, they were known as Makdugi. Birds chirped in the trees, while distant explosions resonated through the forest. A half-wolf figure seemed to be honing his abilities. Bam Siori appeared entirely absorbed and concentrated on his training. Pleased with the final strike he had executed, he concluded his session. From high above the trees, a voice bursts into laughter, mocking how the so-called invincible wolf was defeated by an ordinary human. His tail flicks with amusement as he eyes the scene below, finding it amusing that a majestic, idol-worthy beast could fall so easily. With playful arrogance, he ridicules the wolf's outdated training, prompting a growl of warning in return. Unbothered, the blonde feline grins, finding humor in how touchy Bam Siori's mentor seems to be. He leaps down from the branch, feigning curiosity over how such a loss occurred during the hunt. Bam Siori retorts that it wasn't defeat, but a promise kept, earning another sarcastic jab about old-fashioned ideals. Perplexed, the wolf struggles to understand the strange term, while the cat idly tosses a pebble, explaining that such honor-bound types belong to a bygone mindset. The wolf reflects on the meaning, insisting that he merely upheld his word, but the feline smirk makes it clear he finds the claim laughable, a bothersome, relentless tease who never seems to stop. It appeared that the matriarch had been curious about the incident and had instructed him to deliver the report. Letting out a weary sigh, the wolf agreed to visit her soon. Once his task was done, the feline turned to leave but hesitated briefly, wondering if that man's strength had been underestimated. The creatures they spoke of were unlike any natural beings, born not from the universe's creation, but from the corruption of humankind itself. Manifestations of human sin, entities existing beyond the edge of life, the ultimate predators of all darkness, known as Makdugi. These beings delighted in devouring souls tainted by sin, especially ones like that old man's. When mortals crossed the boundary of their own corruption, they became targets, their spirits shredded as a grim consequence. Li Du-jin pondered whether that torment was a form of retribution, and the answer lay in understanding the greater danger. The hunts disturbed the cosmic balance, the sacred rhythm of rebirth. The endless cycle of human souls returning through reincarnation was what kept the universe aligned, preserving its fragile harmony. Through this continuous cycle, souls evolve into beings of greater purity and light, their transformation serving as the lifeblood of the cosmos. The flow of reincarnation is what sustains existence itself. It had taken countless ages for the universal law of creation to shape the very first human spirit, the most treasured essence in all realms, one that must be preserved to uphold universal equilibrium. Setting his cup down, he was left in silent awe. The weight of her explanation, combined with the memories of his own journey, left no room for disbelief. The lingering sensation of the weapon he had forged still pulsed in his palms, proof that every word resonated with truth. Unrolling an ancient parchment across the table, the goddess revealed how the cosmos purifies humanity's corruption through its own mechanism. Hell served as the crucible for that cleansing, for human sins acted like corrosion, eating away at the universe's foundation. From that decay arose the demon Mukduji, a being born of impurity strong enough to threaten creation itself. Should those tainted souls remain unpurged, their accumulated darkness would eventually trigger the collapse of all existence. Despite grasping the weight of protecting souls to preserve the cosmos, the protagonist found it hard to care about the fate of the universe when his own struggles, like paying next month's rent, felt far more immediate. He had listened to her grand tale, uncertain of what more he could do, and decided it was time to leave. Rising from his seat, he hesitated, questioning the logic behind a deity needing mortal aid to confront such horrors. Ordinary demons and malevolent spirits were within divine reach, but the Makduji, born from humanity's own corruption, could only be vanquished by a human spirit, their natural opposite and embodiment of pure vitality. Her celestial might was powerless against them, which was why, for ages, the gods had formed pacts with mortals to fight by their side. Reaching out, she offered her hand in silent plea, urging Li Du-jin to join her cause. Having proven capable of wielding power fit for a guardian of souls, he could hardly ignore the sight of such ethereal beauty earnestly reaching out to him, her touch both disarming and persuasive. The handsome young man flinched as he spotted his sister walking past the cafe, startled by her sudden appearance at that precise moment. The goddess observed his reaction with mild puzzlement. Gradually, he pieced everything together and made a firm choice. Determined to ensure his sister could roam the streets safely, the protagonist resolved to do everything within his ability. He grasped her hand with certainty. There was an unspoken question on his mind. If she truly was a goddess, could she heal his sister's illness? If the answer was yes, he would unquestionably take on the task. The goddess felt a pang of empathy for the plight of a desperate sibling. Yet, divine law forbade her from meddling directly in human affairs, even for a miracle with the purest intentions. She offered her apologies to Li Du-jin, extinguishing his immediate hope of curing his sister. Unexpectedly, he responded with understanding and acceptance. Nevertheless, his sister's treatment still relied on financial means, and the compensation for the assignment remained substantial. Thus, as long as the goddess compensated him fairly, he was willing to join her in the battle. She felt pleased that he had agreed to take on the role. The two lingered, savoring the quiet moment, hands intertwined as if they were a couple deeply in love. Yet Li Du-jin had more on his mind. Beyond securing funds for his sister's medicine, he wanted a comfortable lifestyle and boldly requested a higher payment. She regarded him thoughtfully and accepted the terms without objection. The pair continued their discussion, extending their time together at the cafe. As night settled in, Li Du-jin returned home. Having just prepared his dinner, he ate slowly, reflecting on the conversation from earlier. He looked up and watched his sister intently. She appeared absorbed in her studies while eating, focused and quiet. Li Du-jin attempted to start a gentle conversation, wondering if his sister also felt the absence of their parents. Yi-jin was taken aback by the unexpected question. Setting her textbook aside, she responded that it was all right, for he had been the one filling the emptiness left by their mother and father. He hadn't anticipated such a response, leaving him to marvel at how his younger sister had grown so emotionally strong. In any case, their parents had little to worry about, as he was doing everything in his power to protect and care for her. Meanwhile, she believed she was equally doing her utmost to watch over her brother. Inside a bustling city mall, a young man browsed the CD and DVD section of a bookstore, searching intently for a particular title. Spotting the DVD he wanted, he felt a spark of joy and hummed quietly, unaware that someone or something was observing him. Elated with his find, he continued to examine the shelf. Suddenly, a tiny creature called out to him. Lifting his hat, he scooped up the little being, chiding it gently for being careless since humans were generally afraid of mice. The tiny mouse wriggled within the hat, offering its apology. Curious about its sudden appearance, the blond boy inquired why it had come to him. It turned out that the mouse had sought him out during a hunt, requesting to fight alongside him. Acknowledging that he could use assistance, he prepared to accept. Then, the small creature revealed that the human had wielded a new object capable of defeating Master Bamseori. And that was precisely why he refused assistance. Just a single strike from that weapon could send the mouse straight to the afterlife. The situation grew even more somber, especially knowing that it genuinely wished to challenge the human whom everyone had been talking about. Thinking rapidly, it explained that, unlike a sword or a spear, the weapon would eventually exhaust its supply. The number of mice it had gathered was more than sufficient to handle the task. Moreover, they had all made a solemn vow. The boy acknowledged the truth in its words. They had pledged to the matriarch that their lives would be devoted entirely to the mission. Yet, that was not his personal aim. His objective was not to perish in battle, but to come through it alive. The mouse, however, pointed out that unlike those already named by the matriarch, despite wanting to survive, they had no option in the matter and were prepared to sacrifice themselves if necessary. Exhausted by their persistence, the boy finally relented. Their willingness to sacrifice would serve a greater purpose, aiding both salvation and the reinforcement against the Makta-ji. He replaced the hat on his head with the mice safely inside and prepared them for battle, knowing the day of the hunt was approaching. Training commenced immediately. Li Du-jin threw himself into every exercise, while the goddess carefully recorded his progress. She silently encouraged him, knowing he would need all the strength he could muster. During that first week, he progressed from sprinting 50 meters to running 3 kilometers. The goddess kept pace beside him effortlessly, treating the long runs as if they were nothing unusual. He questioned the necessity of running so many repetitions each day to assess his stamina. She explained that multiple samples were required to gauge his endurance accurately, which would allow her to design an optimal training regimen. Trusting her guidance, he maintained the steady rhythm she set, running continuously until the sun dipped below the horizon. In the second week, their training shifted to the gym, focusing on strength and conditioning. He set up the bar with the weights, taking a deep, steadying breath. Trembling from the strain, he lifted it with all his might, struggling to keep it aloft. Like a true novice, he eventually lowered the weight, utterly drained by the effort. In response, the goddess commended his attempt and suggested he increase the load slightly. Li Du-jin felt utterly vanquished. During the third week, training intensified, focusing heavily on endurance. She provided guidance as Li Du-jin concentrated on simply surviving each drill. By the final day, he could barely move, crawling across the floor from sheer exhaustion. Without divine support in battle, he might have already faced his end after such grueling sessions. He was nearing the milestone the goddess had set for him. Collapsing against a pole, he clung to it as though his life depended on it. To his disappointment, she noted that he had been 12 minutes slower than the previous session and revealed that the next challenge required running several kilometers to the hot spring. The poor protagonist faced torment unlike anything he had expected. To encourage him, she offered a reward. If he could reach the hot spring in under 10 minutes, one of his wishes would be granted. Even in defeat, her words had an effect, and fueled by sheer determination. Clearly influenced by her manipulation, he rose with resolve to reach the target. Li Du-jin sprinted with all his might, and in that moment, it was hard to blame anyone for doing the same. 18 minutes and 25 seconds had passed. He had exerted everything he could, yet still fell short of the mark. The goddess handed him a bottle of water, acknowledging his effort despite the outcome. She explained that although he hadn't reached the 10-minute goal, his dedication over the past 3 weeks had provided enough data to move forward with the true training. Without granting him a moment of rest, she indicated that the specialized exercises would begin immediately. Attempting to regain his composure, Li Du-jin listened as the goddess outlined the plan. The power of creation he would wield relied on his life energy. Curious, he sought clarification, and she revealed that in her realm, this energy was called Beck. But before commencing, she needed to gauge his current Beck levels. She incinerated an amulet she held and conjured a magical barrier to facilitate the measurement. Gradually, the barrier expanded, enveloping the surroundings until the entire hot spring area was completely enclosed. Training officially resumed. From that moment onward, Alan Li Du-jin would cease to be an ordinary human and step into the role of a guardian of souls. To endure the upcoming battles, he would need to absorb every lesson and instruction with utmost focus. In a distant library, a girl let out a frustrated scream. Observing the scene through a screen, she vented about how her plans with Chasa had been disrupted because of him. Chasa, evidently the goddess, was clearly someone this girl admired greatly. She continued to grumble over how much he had improved during training and how irritating that progress was to her. Chasa directed her attention toward the screen and instructed Sorang to begin measuring Li Du-jin's Beck. Activating the system, she maintained her mental complaints about the protagonist. He knelt before Chasa, mirroring the posture he had taken the previous time. She instructed him to replicate the process he had performed with the rifle, this time forming a small metallic cube. Li Du-jin recalled the sensations from that day and focused on shaping the cube as directed. She requested that he maintain its size while gradually increasing its weight. Slowly, the cube began to press into the ground as its mass grew. He was told to continue adding weight until further notice. A sharp clap echoed through the space. Chasa requested Sorang to transmit the measurement data. From the magic circle, a small sphere shaped like a kitten materialized and floated toward the kneeling Li Du-jin. A delicate thread connected him to the floating sphere. Curious, he examined it, and Chasa indicated that it was a tool for measuring Beck, requiring no concern on his part. Numbers appeared on Sorang's display panel. Chasa noted that his reading exceeded 90, considering that the average hovered around 100, suggesting the measurement could conclude there. Yet she insisted he was capable of further improvement, requesting updates as he approached 180. Sorang reacted with visible surprise at her demand. Meanwhile, Li Du-jin remained fully concentrated on increasing the cube's weight. Chasa inquired about any signs of fatigue or strain, and he confirmed that he felt normal, with no unusual sensations. Concentrating, Chasa assured him that the experiment would not inflict any physical harm. Relieved, he exhaled deeply, as he had feared that channeling his vital force might make him faint or worse. Knowing that no immediate physical danger existed, he felt somewhat at ease. However, Chasa admonished him, explaining that the absence of physical injury did not mean the use of Beck was safe. Meanwhile, in her office, Sorang stared at the screen in astonishment. Typically, humans could reach a maximum of 130 in Beck, yet he was already hitting 153. Back at the training ground, Chasa recalled an important detail and cautioned that when his Beck neared its limit, Li Du-jin would experience a minor nosebleed. She emphasized that he must memorize the exact sensation during training. As in actual combat, it would serve as the only warning before his Beck was depleted. Curious, he wondered what would happen if he continued to push beyond that point, and she clarified that doing so would force him to draw directly from his soul. Each unit of power expended beyond the limit would shorten his lifespan. With no physical feedback, his life could diminish unnoticed, illustrating the true danger of using Beck. Chasa then observed a sudden movement from Sorang. At that very moment, she warned that he was approaching 170, continuing to provide gradual updates until Li Du-jin reached level 200. As Chasa had predicted, his nose began to bleed. Close to his ear, she indicated that he could end the training. Emerging from his intense focus, the magic gradually faded. He clearly relished the praise he received from Chasa. The goddess complimented him further and reminded him to memorize the sensation, as it would serve as his only warning in the future. She offered him her handkerchief to clean his nose, leaving Li Du-jin thoroughly pleased and content. Chasa then contacted Sorang to request the final data from a meter. The girl remained in disbelief at the numbers displayed on her screen, finding them almost impossible. Whoever this man was, he was far beyond the average. She reported the reading to the goddess and inquired how Chasa knew his Beck levels would be so extraordinary. Chasa simply smiled at her before explaining that Li Du-jin's high Beck was due to inheriting a UG. He looked at her with curiosity, wondering what a UG could possibly be. Chasa inquired whether, on the day his parents had died, either of them had made a final request of him. At that instant, a memory surfaced. On the day of the accident, his father had asked him to take care of his sister. Sharing this with Chasa, still tinged with nostalgia, she explained that when someone faces death and entrusts a desperate plea to another, and that plea is accepted wholeheartedly, the responsibility passes on. It is called inheriting the UG. Li Du-jin extended his hand toward the source of that power, realizing it was the Beck his parents had left him. The goddess knelt before him, noting that managing inherited Beck was no simple task. The results reflected his unwavering dedication to fulfilling that request. It was clear that his parents had trusted completely in his capability. Overwhelmed by Chasa's presence and the weight of her words, he rose quickly, feeling the need to regain composure. He did not want her to see him weep. Filling a small container with cold water, he poured it over himself to steady his emotions. Chasa observed curiously, unsure of his reasoning. Now drenched and shivering, Li Du-jin approached her, offering an apology for the sudden act. She smiled at his display, finding it endearing, and indicated that the day's training was complete, allowing him to return home and rest. But first, he needed a way to soothe his swollen eyes from crying. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they made their way home. Morning arrived, accompanied by the cheerful song of birds. Li Du-jin prepared to leave while his sister cleared the breakfast dishes. She inquired about his plans, noting his choice of attire, and was surprised to learn he was heading to the gym. He explained that his new role depended on his physical fitness, but reassured her that it was a safe job, nothing for her to worry about. After finishing breakfast, Li Du-jin set off to train. Yi-jin, still tidying the kitchen, looked on with clear concern for her brother's new responsibilities. Walking along the street, he recalled the encouraging words of the goddess from the previous day about the Beck he had inherited. In his thoughts, her voice resonated, explaining that when someone faces death and entrusts a desperate plea to another, accepting it wholeheartedly transfers the Beck of the one who made the request to the one who accepted it. From that moment, the recipient assumes full responsibility for the plea, carrying the hopes of the deceased. Because of this, Li Du-jin no longer felt alone, knowing that his parents' Beck remained with him, understanding that made taking on the job feel worthwhile. Gatrones assembled to form a training barrier, preventing any humans from entering the area. The barrier stretched across a 500-meter radius, creating a wide, open space. One of the Gatrones scanned Li Du-jin, and he returned its gaze. From the command tower, Sorang chastised him, instructing him to remain still while she assessed his physical condition. He complied, allowing her to continue the evaluation. Li Du-jin felt a flicker of recognition in the voice, sensing he had heard it before, yet he did not realize it belonged to Sorang. Chasa appeared, dressed in completely different attire and with a new hairstyle, signaling that she was ready to begin training. He admitted to feeling nervous, knowing that although he had fought the wolf before, he lacked real experience against monsters. Chasa reassured him, indicating he would not face full-scale monster combat immediately. Today, Li Du-jin would train against a small creature. Upon seeing it, he recognized it as the kitten from the day everything had begun. Chasa confirmed that they had indeed met previously. The kitten's name was Damsel Pio. In the underworld, it served as the spirit tasked with compelling criminals who concealed their true intentions to speak honestly. If Damsel Pio bit someone, the victim would reveal the truth, willingly or not. Li Du-jin was stunned that such an adorable creature could have such a potent effect, and Chasa clarified that it could not harm ordinary humans. In fact, no demon, god, or even MacDoogie could endure normal people, as Beck normally acted as a protective shield. There were, however, exceptions. At that moment, Li Du-jin's Beck had been modified, requiring him to exercise caution. Even a bite from the kitten would now trigger the truth-revealing power. While Chasa explained how his Beck had shifted from defense to offense, he became distracted, and the kitten bit him. The sudden pain made him leap in surprise. Its power activated immediately, forcing him to confess that his eyes often wandered to Chasa's legs due to a particular weakness. Sorang reacted with horror and scolded him through the gatron. Li Du-jin argued with Damsel Pio, pulling his finger from its mouth. The two grew increasingly frustrated with one another. Chasa remarked on his apparent weakness, and he tried to feign ignorance, pretending the topic had never arisen. Sorang suggested he maintain the pretense of forgetting. Turning back to Damsel Pio, Chasa instructed the spirit to bite him repeatedly until Li Du-jin was covered in marks. The kitten focused intently, preparing to comply. Hoping that Sorang had only been joking, everyone watched as the spirit readied itself. Chasa explained that this exercise served as the day's training, meant to prepare him for actual combat. Makdu-ji typically attacked in human form rather than as beasts, but they would begin with Damsel Pio, who posed little real threat. The two faced each other like rivals in an old Western showdown and lunged forward. As he closed in on the cat, Li Du-jin shouted that a cat was just a cat after all. He realized that many of his secrets were being exposed in this skirmish. Sure enough, Li Du-jin ended up thoroughly scratched and bitten. Chasa scolded both of them, reminding him that she hadn't finished her instructions, while Sorang laughed, teasing him for charging in too quickly. She soothed the kitten in her arms, explaining that Li Du-jin wasn't yet accustomed to fighting, so it should be gentler with him. She placed it back on the ground and began preparing for the main battle. Chasa went over the workings of the barrier and the cat drone once more and, with a snap of her fingers, switched the barrier into combat mode. In this mode, they could strike freely since only their projected forms could take damage. Once the battle ended, their actual bodies would be unharmed and return to normal. He took a deep breath, trying to come up with a plan. There was only one way to handle a cat, a fishing toy designed for kittens. His eyes lit up the moment he saw it. Sorang tried to warn him about the danger, but it was already too late. The kitten had locked onto the toy. Li Du-jin froze in confusion. The feline moved with astonishing speed. Sorang explained that when Damsel Pio spotted a toy like that, its hunting instincts kicked in, and once in wild mode, nothing could stop it. The frenzied cat charged straight at Li Du-jin. He panicked, questioning whether this was truly a cat or some kind of demon in disguise. Dropping the broken toy rod, he bolted as fast as he could, with the cat hot on his trail. Sorang and Chasa laughed at the absurd scene unfolding before them. He probably deserved it. Meanwhile, he ran as if his life depended on every step. Suddenly, he heard a voice from the drone, saying that the weeks of training had paid off, allowing him to maintain his top speed longer. Realizing it was Chasa speaking, he seized a chance to ask how he could possibly defeat the kitten, certain it wasn't an opponent he could overcome empty-handed. Chasa began a new explanation. There were 3 core aspects to Beck in combat mode: will, determination, and divinity. To wield Beck effectively, he had to select one of these 3 paths. The kitten had already closed the distance, ready for action. The first skill he would train was will. If mastered, it would grant him the physical capabilities of a Makdugi, including agility and reflexes equal to his opponent's. He asked whether he could already use his will-based power, and Chasa replied that he could not. Li Du-jin pleaded with her to simply teach him how to win, promising he would study the theory later. The kitten's meow deepened, and immediately afterward, it launched an attack in his direction. Damsel Pio was eager for a fight. He was stunned to see the cat shoot a beam from its mouth, and Chasa explained that it was a spirit trained to hunt demons. After all, she went on to say that by using the second attribute, determination, he would gain the ability to fire lasers, just like Damsel Pio. Additionally, he would be able to manipulate other elements, such as fire, and even wield telekinesis. Damsel Pio then prepared a small demonstration of its firepower to help Li Du-jin understand. His soul nearly left his body as he watched the water vanish in seconds. Chasa's voice rang out again, and to his disappointment, she explained that the determination attribute also demanded years of practice. Li Du-jin pleaded with her to compile all the theory into a book for him later. Right now, he only wanted to know how to defeat the cat that fired lasers from its mouth. Chasa apologized for the delay, noting that this was her first time teaching someone combat skills. Meanwhile, the kitten demonstrated more of its abilities. She then mentioned that there was one attribute he could use immediately. He begged her to reveal it quickly. It was divinity. She tried to clarify that it was equal in power to the other 2 attributes, but he broke down, crying and imploring her to help him. Li Du-jin found himself in a precarious position, with the cat spewing fire directly at him. Through the Gatron, Chasa explained that the 3rd attribute allowed him to materialize objects using Beck, the same way he had manipulated Beck when he fought the wolf, meaning it was something he had already experienced before. The divinity attribute was the one most frequently used by soul guardians to craft weapons capable of harming Makdugi. Damsel Pio readied herself and formed a magic circle. In contrast, Li Du-jin stayed vigilant. Through the circle, a giant feline paw appeared. Startled, he asked if it was really safe. Chasa reassured him, reminding him that any damage taken in battle wouldn't affect his actual body, and when the barrier fell, everything would return to normal. Even if his body had been split in two, he would survive. However, the system didn't erase the sensation of pain. Before he could even process that, Damsel Pio struck him squarely, sending him flying. Though unharmed, the pain felt remarkably real, just as Chasa had warned. He heard another attack meow from the cat. A new strike was coming. Li Du-jin realized he couldn't keep dodging forever. He needed to defend himself. He conjured an iron shield, reflecting Damsel Pio's assault. The impact was fierce, but he held firm. One of the cat drone approached him. Sorang admitted he hadn't done badly, and Chasa praised him, pleased with the outcome. Even without employing proper defensive techniques, he had successfully blocked the attack by materializing the iron shield. The divinity attribute, depending on its application, could even substitute for the other two attributes. He began envisioning a more efficient way to wield the shield. With the shield in hand, defending himself was no longer an issue. Focusing intently, he started materializing additional objects. Now, it was his turn to strike back. Watching the duel, Sorang asked what kind of effects could result from combining a shield and weapon like that. Simply achieving that combination was enough to make the training valuable. Yet she still questioned Li Du-jin's potential. Chasa explained that all previous Soul Guardians had only been able to materialize basic weapons, such as swords or spears. In contrast, Li Du-jin could conjure more intricate weapons like these. Techniques that normally took hours to master, he accomplished on his very first attempt. She was confident he could learn the other attributes without difficulty. But for now, beginning with divinity was the wisest choice. Still, with his current skill, even armed with a weapon, he wouldn't be able to defeat Damsel Pio. Small and fast, Li Du-jin thought. He had anticipated this result, yet failing to land a single hit was still deeply frustrating. The kitten summoned the massive paw once more, striking him squarely again. Even with the shield, he was hurled backward. His shield shattered, and he slammed to the ground. As expected, simply having a weapon wasn't enough. He panted heavily from the effort. Damsel Pio leapt onto his weapon, daring him to retrieve it. Li Du-jin refocused, thinking through a new strategy. A tense energy crackled between them. The kitten released the weapon and charged at him, preparing another attack while he concentrated. Li Du-jin quickly materialized something more effective, creating a torrent of water to engulf the kitten. The feline flailed in panic as the water continued to pour, trapping it in a swirling current. Damsel Pio was completely subdued. Before it could recover, Li Du-jin acted swiftly. Now at ease, he celebrated while the kitten remained confined within an iron cage. Sorang could hardly believe he had managed to conjure water. Producing such a large volume of material without a defined form usually required far more training. That day, he had only manifested Beck as an object twice. How had he managed to create water? Chasa explained that, perhaps within the scope of the divinity attribute, and thanks to the sheer amount of Beck he possessed, his creative capacity exceeded the usual limits. They settled on a bench to rest after the training session. The results had been outstanding. The goddess hadn't anticipated that he would defeat Damsel in such a clever and unexpected way. Cats that enjoy water are so rare it takes 3 generations to find one, he remarked, slightly embarrassed. Even a unique kitten would still act according to its nature. Though it was still early, Chasa concluded the day's training and assigned Li Du-jin homework for the next 3 days. She handed him a book and instructed him to study the structure of the weapons, so materializing them would be easier in the future. The main weapons were already highlighted in the book. Opening it, he saw that every detail had been carefully documented. To conclude, she mentioned that the Beck he had expended during training would fully recover after a day of rest. He found the whole process amusing, as it reminded him of the games he used to play. Chasa also warned him to be ready, as someone's Beck was on the verge of corruption. She instructed Sorang to play a video showing the person's face. A woman appeared on the screen, and the cat drone's voice explained that with one more minor offense, she would soon become a target for the Mokdugi. Li Du-jin looked at Chasa, asking what that meant. She confirmed that it was likely they would have to fight together soon. Meanwhile, in a high-rise office downtown, a brunette examined photos of several boys, disappointed by the lack of appeal in any of them. One caught her attention, but interfering with him could bring trouble. She settled on 2 who were at least worth the effort. She called someone named Manager Kim, asking him to summon boys number 3 and 8 to the club that night. However, their debut was scheduled for the following day, making it seemingly impossible. She insisted, arguing that their debut had nothing to do with her enjoyment. The manager refused repeatedly, angering her enough to threaten to jeopardize the boys' debut, since her company oversaw the show. The brunette slammed the phone down in frustration. Those fools were really testing her patience. She grabbed her bag, ready to leave, and instructed her secretary to call a car and notify the club that she was on her way. Adjusting her bag, she checked to make sure she had enough for the evening and smiled, seeing that it would be more than sufficient. Meanwhile, outside the building, a Makduji watched her closely. Who would have expected that her Beck was already so low? By his estimate, by morning she would be completely exhausted. She wasn't really his type, but given all the terrible things she had done, there was no choice but to consume her. The following day, at Lee Do-jin's apartment, he focused intently, trying to absorb the contents of the book Chasa had given him. There were so many details to take in. Clearly, mastering the will and determination techniques was still far beyond his current ability. The book instructed, infuse Beck into your spine to strengthen it, or channel the energy of fire, combine it with Beck, and make it explode. Yet even after reading, he had no clue how to apply in practice. Lee Do-jin concentrated some Beck in his hands. Perhaps the divinity power of materialization was easier for him, since he had always enjoyed creating things as a child. If Chasa was correct, his Beck would fully recover after a day of rest. Compared to the previous training day, his body felt much lighter today. Now that he was in better shape, could he finally head out? Lee Do-jin drew back the curtain and was surprised to find his sister still awake. She asked where he was going at this hour, and he replied that he was attending a friend's grandmother's funeral. Confused, she reminded him that he didn't seem to have any friends. He tried to dodge the question, claiming he had recently met someone named Damsel Pio. In any case, he promised he'd be back home soon, then quickly slipped past his sister. Keeping secrets from her was proving to be much harder than he expected. She watched him leave, thinking that Damsel was actually a pretty cute name. In a large building, Lee Do-jin and Chasa sat together in the lobby. She urged him to relax slightly, but he was clearly on edge. It wasn't that he hadn't faced a Makdugi before, but ignorance can be bliss, and now he knew all the details. Chasa announced that their target would be arriving shortly. Trying to act like a normal person, he attempted to distract himself by flipping through the magazine in his hands. Yet as he skimmed the pages, a detail caught his eye. A seemingly simple piece of clothing listed in the magazine cost more than his entire monthly budget. But wait, he felt he had seen that outfit before. The clothes Chasa was wearing matched exactly the ones pictured in the magazine. Curious, he asked how she got them, and the goddess explained that her secretary made her outfits based on the fashions of the era. He remembered the different voice he had heard from the cat drone, and Chasa confirmed that it belonged to her secretary, Sorang. Apparently, Sorang had a strong interest in fashion and, inspired by the magazine she subscribed to, created Chasa's clothing using her skills. Lee Do-jin marveled that her clothes were produced with magic and continued flipping through the magazine. He praised Sorang, and the two chatted for a while. Soon after, Chasa sensed the presence of a Makdugi target. It was Ju Jeannie, the brunette, and her sins had surpassed the allowable limit. He asked where she was, and Chasa pointed toward the hotel entrance. The door opened, and a woman entered, accompanied by a young boy. It appeared that she ran an entertainment company specializing in scouting new idols, and the boy beside her was one of her victims. The reason she had exceeded the sin limit. She would select a trainee on the verge of debut, promise them guaranteed success, toy with their dreams, and then discard them like broken dolls. To ensure their silence, she manipulated major media outlets to manufacture scandals that would ruin them socially. The worst part was that she took pleasure in watching her victims fall apart. Lee Do-jin set the magazine down on the table, realizing that the woman Sorang had shown him a few days earlier had lost her Beck defensive power, just like the old man in his previous encounter. Chasa confirmed this, explaining that even the strongest, purest Beck fades when a person acts with malice and commits crimes. The more negative karma they accumulate, the moment they exceed the threshold, they become targets for the Makdugi. Regardless of being hunted, Chasa added, Ju Jeannie would meet her end in this hotel room between 3:15 and 3:30 in the morning. Chasa placed her clipboard on the table and cautioned that the event would occur within the next 30 minutes. She still sensed no trace of Makdugi, so they had a little time to spare. The pair, Ju Jeannie and the boy, headed for the elevator to reach their room. Before the doors closed, Lee Do-jin and Chasa stepped in to accompany them. Ju Jeannie eyed them warily. To distract her, Chasa mentioned that her room, like Lee Do-jin's, was also on the 12th floor. The older woman praised Chasa's beauty and asked if she was already working for any idol agency. Attempting to recruit her, Ju Jeannie introduced herself as an agent and invited the goddess to visit her company sometime. Chasa smiled and gave the most delicate excuse she could think of. Linking arms with Lee Do-jin, she politely declined, saying she planned to marry him and that after marriage, pursuing an idol career would be far too difficult. Ju Jeannie was taken aback, having expected anything but that reply. It was truly disappointing. Even though it was a lie, Lee Do-jin was visibly shaken by Chasa's statement, unprepared for the sudden blow. Meanwhile, Ju Genie turned to the boy, advising him to quit smoking and take better care of his skin, as he would soon be filming a commercial. Hearing which company it was for, he grew suspicious, since a commercial had recently come out featuring another boy Ju Jin he had dated. The moment he mentioned it, her demeanor shifted, and Ju Genie let slip that the same boy would soon be exposed for a gambling addiction. The boy remarked that he hadn't expected that from her, but she must surely know all the hidden scandals of the people under her influence. Lee Do-jin felt a chill run down his spine, realizing this was likely how she managed her victims. Both pairs reached the 12th floor and walked toward their separate rooms. Once apart, his curiosity flared. If she was destined to die that night, how exactly would it happen? She didn't appear ill, nor did she seem like someone who would take her own life. Yet even Chasa admitted she couldn't predict the cause. The future is uncontrollable, and even knowing the time a life will end doesn't reveal how it will occur. Lee Do-jin wondered if it might be some kind of hotel accident, but Chasa explained that if it were a major incident, the building would be swarming with agents like her. If it wasn't a large-scale accident, then what could be behind it? Could a former victim be involved? It was possible. Many people despised her, so someone from her past might be responsible. If that were true, it meant the potential culprit could be hiding somewhere in the hotel even at that very moment. They couldn't just stand by and watch this happen. Letting someone fall into crime while her fate is twisted beyond repair wasn't an option. Chasa faces him calmly and tells him that this means he has to decide. If Ju Jin he truly dies because someone kills her, then only two roads lie ahead. If they step in, stop the murder, and keep her alive, they will have to confront the Makduji that comes hunting for her spirit. But if they allow events to unfold and the Makduji shows up slightly too late, it will never expose itself to them, and they can avoid a dangerous clash. So what will Lee Do-jin do? Take her soul after the murder happens, or stop the killing and face the creature head-on? It's your call, she says softly, moving a little closer. If he chooses to stop the crime, they must tell Ju Jin-hee who they really are. And the moment they do, the Makduji tracking her might discover them before anything even begins. So basically, showing who they really were would be no different than sending an invitation to the creature to come after them. She tells him to think it through and pick the smarter path. Lee Do-jin falls silent, weighing everything in his mind. The decision wasn't simple at all. They had no clue how she was supposed to die, and no one could see what tomorrow would bring. Even if a person's lifespan was already set, the exact second it would end was still a mystery. Chasa studies his face as he finally reaches a conclusion. Lee Do-jin decides he cannot allow an ordinary person to turn into a killer because of one burst of anger. And if fate isn't completely fixed, then Ju Jin-hee might still die in some other unexpected way. So instead of accepting either outcome, he considers stopping the businesswoman from losing her soul and keeping one of the trainees from ruining his life with a crime. Maybe there was a way to save everyone. The boys she tricked were probably around the same age as his younger sister. They had given up their childhoods, chasing the dream of standing on stage one day. In the end, they were only teenagers swallowed by the dark side of the entertainment world, desperately holding onto the false hope Ju Jin-hee dangled in front of them. After enduring so much pain, their thirst for revenge had grown so fierce that they were ready to destroy the person who caused it all, no matter the cost. If stopping the incident that night meant the young man wouldn't cross the line in a crime, then he would still have a chance to rebuild his future another way. Lee Do-jin grips Chasa firmly, his resolve clear. Whether it was Ju Jin-hee losing her soul to a Makduji or one of the betrayed trainees staining his hands with sin, he wanted the power to block both disasters. So he asked Chasa to stand with him. Smiling gently, the goddess tells him she will honor his decision and support him. Together, they walk toward Ju Jin-hee's room. After acting without thinking, he suddenly feels awkward about grabbing Chasa by the shoulders. Then he remembers what happened in the elevator and realizes she was the one who hugged him first. So maybe she didn't mind at all. Being the overthinking type, he keeps replaying it in his head anyway. Chasa lets out a soft laugh, clearly amused by him. Unfortunately, she assumes he's acting strange because he's worried about the young trainee. Lee Do-jin quickly tries to go along with that idea, but in his nervous state, he blurts out what was truly on his mind instead. Chasa blinks at his strange words, clearly puzzled. Just to be safe, he quickly asks if she has the ability to hear people's thoughts. She casually replies that she probably could if she tried, and he instantly wishes he had kept his mouth shut. Brushing it aside, the goddess shifts the topic and tells him he has a kind heart, something that will matter in future fights because the cleaner a person's intentions are, the more powerful their beck becomes. She tells him not to lose that purity. Lee Do-jin swallows nervously, silently thanking the heavens that she isn't peeking inside his head and uncovering the less noble thoughts hiding there. He takes it as a clear sign to keep his mind under control. As they near the elevator once more, Chasa mentions she still doesn't sense any trace of the Makta-ji. The last time, the wolf had created a barrier before showing its real body. From what they've seen, these creatures blend in as humans, only exposing their true shapes after sealing off an area with that barrier. By doing this, they trick their victims until the perfect moment to strike. And once inside that sealed space, time completely freezes. No matter how long you stay trapped in there, only a few seconds pass in the outside world. Even if the entire place gets destroyed during a battle, once the barrier disappears, everything resets like nothing ever happened, letting the monsters hunt without leaving a single clue behind. When that barrier forms, it releases a strange mental ripple you can actually sense. As they continue talking, a sharp scream echoes through the corridor, and a boy suddenly comes sprinting out in panic. It was a trainee who had come to the hotel with Ju Jinhee. Chasa reacts instantly, firing a spell that freezes him mid-step. Without wasting time, she orders Sarang to alter the boy's memories and send him safely back home. The floating cat drone slips through a portal and moves toward the trembling idol. It immediately begins carrying out Chasa's instructions. From the looks of it, another trainee who had been hiding must have attacked Ju Jinhee. There was no time to lose. The two rush toward her room, but when they reach the door, they find it locked tight. Since there's no other option, they prepare to break in. Li Du-jin gathers his energy, ready to act, but Chasa moves first and casts a burst of flames at the handle, melting the metal until the lock gives way completely. She warns Li Du-jin to watch his hand since the melted metal is still burning hot, then casually adds that breaking in is a man's job as he steps inside the suite. The moment he enters, a desperate cry for help rings out. Just like he thought, one of the trainees driven by revenge had come to confront her. The young idol is yelling for Ju Jinhee to rot in hell. Before he can say more, Li Du-jin cuts him off and grabs him. He tries to calm him down, saying that if he goes through with this, he'll destroy his own future. The boy snaps back, shouting that he'll kill Li Du-jin too if he keeps interfering. Their voices clash loudly across the room. The idol struggles and pleads to be released while Ju Jinhee coughs violently from the bed. Li Du-jin wrestles with the furious trainee, realizing that the woman had already wrecked this boy's life long ago. Still, whether he committed murder tonight would change everything. Between coughs, the businesswoman spits out insults at the idol, demanding to know how he dared to attack her. She then recognizes Li Du-jin and Chasa from the elevator and asks if they're connected to that crazy person. The boy explodes again, screaming about the false drug scandal she spread about him and how it completely shattered his career. Instead of backing down, she coldly snaps that the drugs discovered in his car had absolutely nothing to do with her. The idol fires back, swearing he'll uncover evidence and expose her no matter what. But Ju Jinhee only smirks and reminds him that even if he did find proof, no one would trust a disgraced idol over her. Tension fills the air as Li Du-jin, already overwhelmed, tells her to quit pushing him because her taunts are pouring fuel on the fire. She ignores him and keeps going, mocking the boy as useless, claiming she only showed a bit of kindness to someone who never had the talent to debut alone. Her cruel words drive the idol closer to the edge. In a rushed attempt to stop everything from exploding, Li Du-jin suddenly blurts out that her time was nearly up anyway, so there was no need for him to ruin his life over her. The entire room goes dead quiet. Both the idol and the businesswoman stare at him, stunned and confused by what he just revealed. Chasa moves without hesitation and casts a spell that drops the boy into a trance, which only terrifies Ju Jin even more. Panic spreads across her face as she demands to know what they did to him and who they truly are, her fear rising by the second. Li Du-jin and Chasa exchange a look and realize there's no point hiding anymore. They decide it's time to show the truth and explain that they've come as agents of the underworld to change what's about to happen. Ju Jinhee immediately misunderstands and assumes they're prosecutors playing some strange trick. From there, she begins throwing threats around, boasting that she has connections all the way up to the Supreme Court and could ruin them with a single phone call. Chasa remains calm, completely unfazed, because the only court that matters for Ju Jinhee is the one waiting for her after death. The businesswoman laughs mockingly and says they can try whatever they want. It won't make a difference. But her confidence cracks the moment she sees the idol's body slowly fading from sight. That sight can only mean one thing. The Makta-ji barrier has been activated. In an instant, Chasa steps in front of Ju Jinhee and takes a protective stance. She orders Li Du-jin to create a shield large enough to cover all three of them. Her voice turns sharp as she warns that she can sense a starving presence near the window. Without hesitation, she pulls a sheet of paper from her clipboard, casts a spell on Ju Jinhee and whispers for her to stay silent if she values her soul. Together, they brace themselves for the fight that is about to begin. Just to be safe, Chasa quickly pulls Ju Jinhee a few steps away from her original spot, and Li Du-jin declares that the protective wall is fully formed. Out of nowhere, something slams against the barrier with a sharp clang, and when he rises slightly to check, he sees a knife embedded in a shield. Chasa immediately warns him not to peek over the top. This was only the start. The sound of cracking glass spreads across the room, followed by the window exploding inward. In the next second, a storm of identical knives shoots straight at them. If that barrier hadn't been raised in time, they would have been skewered on the spot. The blades keep coming without pause. Each impact chips away tiny fragments of a shield, and the shattered pieces bounce back and sting Li Du-jin. Through clenched teeth, he nervously asks if their contract happens to include any kind of life coverage, and Chasa calmly tells him to focus instead of panicking. Slowly, she lifts her hand and begins reciting another spell, causing a glowing golden circle to appear in front of their barrier. The knives continue flying, but now they are drawn toward that shining ring as she finishes her chant. The moment the blades strike the circle, every single one of them shoots back the way it came. The rain of blades suddenly comes to a halt. Li Du-jin dares to hope it might finally be finished. Then a youthful voice drifts in from the shattered window. Two figures step into the room, crunching over the broken glass, and the cheeky little cat shows up once again. He glances at the barrier and smirks, saying that judging by its size, they must have burned through a serious amount of Beck already. With his usual mocking tone, he suggests that if they hand over the soul now, they can skip the whole fight and save themselves the trouble. Before he can keep rambling, Chasa sharply orders Li Du-jin to strike first. Without hesitation, Li Du-jin summons his weapon and launches an attack at the pair of Mokta-ji. One of them takes the hit, while the blonde one quickly dodges and slips onto the window ledge. "Hey, seriously?" he complains. "I wasn't even done talking." He grumbles that no one told him the human could wield multiple weapons at once, but shrugs it off since he has backup anyway. Grinning with excitement, he proudly introduces his partner as a special counter meant to deal with Li Du-jin's weapon type. The puppet-like companion turns toward the blonde cat and asks if he's really fine leaving the fight to them, and the cat confidently replies that everything will be just fine. He wanted to see what they were truly capable of, and with that decision made, the group began preparing for battle. As the fight started, the rats that had been struck by earlier attacks slowly began dropping out from inside the puppet, one after another. Li Du-jin felt a surge of worry at the sight. Each shot from the weapon carried tremendous power, yet despite that strength, it could only take down a single rat at a time. From that moment on, every bullet became precious, forcing Li Du-jin to carefully count each one he had left. He quickly reloaded his weapon as the rats surged forward in a relentless wave. Li Du-jin clearly did not have enough bullets to stop such a massive swarm, but there was no room for hesitation anymore. The number of enemies was simply overwhelming, far too many to eliminate individually. Then one of the rats issued a command, and the ones that had already been struck began moving in unison. They gathered together and formed a glowing magic circle on the ground before unleashing a powerful explosion against the shield protecting the group. The blast crashed against the barrier with terrifying force, and Li Du-jin pushed himself to his absolute limit just to hold the impact back. Seeing the strain, Chasa stepped in and summoned a defensive barrier of his own, reinforcing the protection and forcing the rats to be pushed back slightly. However, the small monsters quickly noticed that the barrier was not as strong as it appeared. Realizing its weakness, they immediately swarmed toward it and began gnawing at the barrier, trying to tear their way through with relentless determination. Chasa quickly grabs Ju Jinhee and pulls her close, warning that the barrier would not last much longer. It was only a temporary defense, and there was no time to waste. She planned to create a far stronger barrier in the room next door, which meant they had to retreat immediately before the current one collapsed. Behind them, the enemies continued gnawing relentlessly at the magical wall. Because the barrier had not been reinforced with spiritual backing, it was far easier for the creatures to damage it, and cracks were already beginning to spread across its surface. Realizing the defense would soon fail, the group rushed out of the room. As they ran, Li Du-jin's mind raced, desperately searching for a way to deal with such an overwhelming number of rats. In the previous room, the Mokta-ji, currently taking the form of a mischievous cat boy, watched the entire scene unfold with clear amusement. The army of rats tearing away at the barrier seemed to entertain him greatly, as if the chaos itself were part of the game. Up ahead, Chasa reached the next room and launched herself forward with explosive speed. Still holding Ju Jinhee in her arms, she slammed her foot into the door and kicked it open in a single powerful motion. Behind them, the rats continued gnawing furiously at the weakening barrier, determined to break through and reach their prey. Li Du-jin quickly moved into position, trying to form a plan as the pressure mounted. He wondered whether Chasa could use the mirror spell again, but the realization soon struck that such a technique would be useless against the Makdaji, since the creature was not human. A chilling understanding followed soon after. All of those rats were Makdaji. The goddess, observing the situation, found the sight astonishing, noting that it was the first time she had ever witnessed a demon colony like this. Watching the way the rats moved and coordinated with perfect precision, it became increasingly clear that they were not acting as individuals at all. Every movement suggested a single will guiding them, as though the entire swarm shared one unified consciousness. Chasa pulls another sheet from her clipboard and summons a second barrier while they assess the situation, and soon a layered magic protection circle forms around them. She considers their options and wonders whether he can create any weapon besides the one he had been using, something capable of wiping out all the rats at once, or at least cutting down far greater numbers. Unfortunately, that weapon remains his only reliable option because the others he can manifest are far smaller and weaker, the result of not yet memorizing the intricate internal structures required to recreate more complex weapons. Chasa lets out a quiet sigh as she thinks about what they could possibly do next. The situation is dangerous, but there is still one risky possibility left, because it is technically possible to manifest objects without fully understanding every detail of their structure. Under normal circumstances, such a gamble would never be worth a risk, but the relentless swarm of rats leaves them with little choice if they hope to survive. She directs him to sit on the bed while she prepares the next step. Outside, the Makdaji colony continues clawing and gnawing at the first barrier, their constant assault sending ripples across the glowing surface. Within the fragile safety of the room, Chasa prepares to manipulate Li Du-jin's back in order to force his brain to operate at 100% capacity for a few brief seconds. However, the process is extremely dangerous because Beck behaves differently when it is used directly on the body. Instead of being consumed only once, it continues draining energy every moment the effect remains active, which is exactly why they had avoided attempting something like this until now. Even for someone like him, who carried the Beck of 3 people within his body, the maximum time he could maintain it was only 5 minutes. On top of that, there was always the unsettling possibility that the process might fail entirely. Li Du-jin tries to ease the tension with a small smile, attempting to lighten the heavy atmosphere, but Chasa refuses to entertain the mood. Outside, the swarm of tiny rats continues its relentless work, their sharp teeth steadily gnawing at the barrier without pause. There is no room for distraction. To begin the process, Chasa guides him into a calm state, making it clear that his mind must remain completely at peace, free from anxiety or negative thoughts, focusing only on bright and positive feelings. She urges him to concentrate on the one thing that could bring him the greatest happiness in the world, because while he holds that image firmly in his mind, she will begin manipulating his back to trigger the surge in his brain. The first thought that rises in Li Du-jin's mind is the simple, satisfying joy of money, the dream of wealth forming naturally in the mind of a practical capitalist. Soon that thought deepens, transforming into something far more meaningful as he imagines using that money to finally cure his sister completely. As the image becomes clearer, everything begins to progress smoothly, and little by little the activation level starts to rise. Li Du-jin remains fully immersed in his thoughts, holding on to the peaceful future he longs for. After his sister is cured, he imagines living a quiet and comfortable life, far away from danger, building a warm family of his own, and within that peaceful dream, he finds himself picturing Chasa standing beside him as his beautiful wife. That thought makes the activation levels climb even faster. In his mind, he begins to picture an even brighter future, imagining a warm family life with her, 2 children running through the house, a boy and a girl, and perhaps even a cat and a dog completing the peaceful home he longed for. The magic begins responding in ways that even surprise Chasa, the energy rising far quicker than she had anticipated. Meanwhile, Li Du-jin remains completely immersed in the life he is building inside his imagination, a quiet and joyful world where the 2 of them share a happy family together. At that moment, Chasa gives the signal to pull him back, attempting to wake him from the dreamlike state, because the time has come to fully activate his brain. However, Li Du-jin remains trapped in the trance. When he looks forward, the goddess standing before him blends with the image of the loving wife from his dream, his mind briefly losing the boundary between reality and imagination. The warm fantasy in his mind continues to intensify, filling him with excitement and happiness, and that surge of emotion pushes the activation level beyond the limits Chasa originally expected. In the other room, the cat boy watches the stubborn determination of the tiny rats while quietly wondering just how powerful the goddess truly is. Under normal circumstances, a simple barrier like that should have collapsed long ago under such relentless gnawing, yet it still stands. Still, the outcome is not his concern. He casually spins one of his weapons between his fingers, amused as he wonders how long the people inside will manage to hold out against the overwhelming rat colony. Eventually, the barrier begins to show signs of strain, faint cracks spreading across its surface as tiny holes start to form where the rats have chewed the longest. Despite the growing danger outside, Chasa cannot hide how impressed she is by the unexpected results unfolding before her. Li Du-jin had successfully pushed his brain to 100% activation, achieving a result far beyond what anyone had expected. Almost as if they had been waiting for that exact moment, the Mokdu-ji finally shattered the first barrier and surged forward toward the second. Determined to break through faster, the colony unleashed a brutal spell that required the sacrifice of 3 of their own small rats. A blazing fireball formed and slammed directly into Chasa's magic circle, sending cracks racing across its glowing surface. The leader of the colony urged the swarm onward, driving them to keep attacking without hesitation. Before long, a small hole finally opened in the barrier, and the fractures around it quickly began to widen. Yet just as the rats pressed forward, something unexpected was hurled through the opening they had created. Curiosity spread through the swarm as their eyes fixed on the strange object clutched by one of the little rodents. Written clearly across its surface were the words "Fragmentation Grenade," and before any of them could react, the object detonated violently. The explosion ripped through the swarm, leaving them stunned. It seemed impossible that such a small metal sphere could unleash such destructive force. Watching from afar, the cat boy quietly analyzed the situation, noting that this was already the 3rd different weapon his opponent had used. If the battle continued at this pace, the boy reasoned that Li Du-jin would exhaust his beck far sooner than expected. Although the grenades were small, they were undeniably effective against the tightly packed colony, yet it was obvious that he could not keep producing them endlessly. Meanwhile, the rat leader quickly adapted to the threat and commanded the swarm to scatter. After all, they were only small explosives, and if the colony spread out across the battlefield, they would no longer be such easy targets. Instantly, the rats began rushing in every direction, their once tightly packed formation dissolving into chaotic movement. Then something completely unexpected happens. A bucket packed with several mini grenades is suddenly hurled over the swarm of rats, arcing through the air before dropping straight toward them. There is no possible way to escape from something like that. Realizing the danger, the colony leader reacts instantly and issues a desperate command, ordering the rats closest to the explosives to leap onto them and cling tightly in an attempt to contain as many of the incoming fragments as possible. At the same moment, Chasa activates her mirror spell, and the entire room bursts into a golden glow. The light reflects across the metal surfaces of the grenades, triggering all of them simultaneously in a brilliant flash of destruction. Watching from afar, the cat boy is genuinely shocked by the clever tactic, impressed by how one spell had been used to trigger another in such a precise and devastating way. A large portion of the colony is wiped out by the blast, though the rats still manage to absorb part of the damage and, more importantly, learn how to counter the tactic if it happens again. Refusing to retreat, the survivors gather their determination and prepare to continue the assault. Meanwhile, Li Du-jin focuses intensely as he shapes another weapon, forming a new attack object before tossing it through the crack in the barrier, attempting to repeat the same trick used with the mini grenades. For quick, rats immediately surround the strange object, trying to contain the blast before it can spread. However, this time it is not a grenade like the others. Instead, thick smoke begins to spill out, spreading rapidly across the area. As the rats are touched by it, they feel a terrifying sensation, as if their bodies themselves have been set ablaze. The cat boy instinctively steps back, realizing with surprise that their opponent seems to have manipulated white fire and somehow transformed it into a suffocating smoke. As far as he knows, no known spell teaches such a technique, and Li Du-jin should only be capable of controlling fire and iron. He had originally promised not to interfere in the battle, even if the rats were defeated, but the situation has now escalated far beyond what he expected, leaving little room to continue treating the fight like a game. Inside the barrier, Chasa and Li Du-jin watch the burning smoke spread across the battlefield, understanding that the time has come to prepare for their final move. She reminds him that his remaining beck is nearly exhausted, forcing him to be extremely careful with whatever he does next. Still operating with his brain at full 100% activation, Li Du-jin begins shaping what will become the grand finale. Furious at the losses they have suffered, the rat leader quickly regains control and commands the remaining swarm to regroup. Those who have suffered less from the white flames form a protective barricade, shielding the more heavily injured rats as the colony struggles to recover for one last push. The opponent's Beck reserves should have been close to exhaustion by now. All the rats needed to do was endure a little longer until the smoke thinned out. However, before that could happen, a purple glow suddenly began to form around them. Chasa's defensive barrier closed in and trapped the entire group together. She had already predicted that they would regroup in exactly this way. If they had been ordinary rats, they would have scattered and fled. But these creatures carried pride and would never abandon the fight in the middle of a crisis. With a leader capable of sacrificing his own companions to achieve victory, the decision to gather together had been inevitable. The Makduji had unknowingly walked straight into the trap, yet even then they refused to accept defeat. In their calculations, the barrier surrounding them could be broken within 3 seconds. Unfortunately for them, 3 seconds was far too slow. Li Du-jin stepped forward holding a flamethrower, fully aware that even a single second would be more than enough. The rat leader stared up in growing fear as the final attack loomed. Believing the battle was essentially over, Chasa pulled Li Du-jin out of the dangerous 100% activation mode. She reminded him that his Beck was almost completely drained, forcing them to be precise with whatever remained. Li Du-jin could feel the exhaustion spreading through his body, the strain of pushing his brain to its limits already taking a heavy toll. Because of that massive energy consumption, he had only managed to manifest 2 small fuel tanks, each capable of feeding the flamethrower for barely 2 seconds. Even so, he was certain that would be enough to end the battle once and for all. Just as victory seemed within reach, the Catboy finally decided to make his presence known, casually interrupting the scene while claiming the fight had become somewhat unfair. Neither Chasa nor Li Du-jin had expected him to step in. At first he had planned to simply watch the outcome, but now he had changed his mind. In his view, the human standing before him had to die right there and then. Chasa reacted instantly, moving to shield Li Du-jin from the incoming attack. The Catboy remained amused, confidently suggesting that breaking a barrier like hers would be effortless for someone trained in martial arts, and he hinted that she should step aside if she wished to keep her pretty face unharmed. Chasa, however, showed no sign of intimidation. She tossed her clipboard aside and openly challenged him, curious to see how skilled he truly was beneath that deceptively childlike appearance. The Catboy's expression darkened with irritation at her boldness, and he immediately launched his attack. Chasa shifted into a defensive stance and began intercepting every knife he hurled toward her. One after another, the blades were caught or deflected with precise movements, including the final one aimed directly at Li Du-jin's head. Watching her movements closely, the Catboy could not help but acknowledge her skill. For a moment, he found himself genuinely puzzled about who this woman truly was. Between the two of them, it had become strangely difficult to tell who was meant to be the fragile princess and who was the true warrior, leaving him half amused and half annoyed that she had not even allowed a single blade to slip through. Chasa calmly lets the captured weapons fall to the floor, the metallic clatter echoing through the room. She reflects that in the department where she works, they are constantly understaffed, which makes every single member incredibly valuable. Hearing that, the Catboy bursts into laughter, amused by the comparison. In his own organization, they also suffer from shortage of members. Even the useless ones like the battered rats scattered across the floor still hold value to them. For that reason, he decides that today will be a retreat. The rat leader struggles to accept the decision, clearly believing the fight could still continue. But the Catboy immediately silences him, treating the entire colony like worthless trash that should simply accept their defeat. At that moment, an unexpected voice echoes through the room. Ju-jin, he has finally woken up, her eyes unfocused as she tries to understand her surroundings, wondering if the strange scene before her is nothing more than another hallucination. Li Du-jin turns toward her in alarm, realizing the old woman could not have chosen a worse moment to regain consciousness. The blonde Catboy, however, immediately sees an opportunity. The prey they've been hunting has unknowingly stepped out from the safety of the barrier on her own. With a sly grin, he hurls the surviving rats toward her direction, offering them a chance at glory by claiming the soul and earning the favor of the mysterious mother of the name. But Chasa reacts without hesitation. In a swift motion, she strikes Ju-jin-hee and pulls her out of the rat's reach, sending the old woman back into unconsciousness before the swarm can reach her. Unfortunately, that act leaves Chasa momentarily exposed. With her back turned, the enemy seizes the perfect opportunity, and a storm of knives suddenly tears through the air, all flying straight toward her.